I never imagined that the most thrilling and confusing chapter of my life would begin with someone I thought of only as my mother's friend. Her name was Laura, and she was the kind of woman who carried an aura with her wherever she went. My mother, Susan, had known her since college, and although life had taken them in different directions, they had managed to keep their bond alive across the years. To me, Laura was simply a familiar face who would show up at birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and family cookouts. She was warm, funny, and outspoken in a way that often made my quiet, reserved mother laugh harder than anyone else could. But as I grew older, my perception of Laura began to shift. I was 26 when the story I'm about to tell really began, old enough to know right from wrong but still young enough to be lured by temptation and excitement. At the time, I was struggling with my own relationship. I had been with my girlfriend, Megan, for nearly 4 years, and things had grown stagnant. We weren't fighting all the time, but the spark had faded. Our conversations had turned into checklists, bills, chores, schedules. I felt unseen, and in turn, I had started to pull away emotionally without even realizing it. It was during this fragile point in my life that Laura re-entered it more closely. My mother had invited her to stay at our house for a week while she was dealing with some renovations at her own place. Laura, recently divorced, had been leaning on her friends for support, and my mother was more than happy to open our home. Since I lived just a few blocks away, I ended up spending more time at my mother's place during that week, helping out with errands and occasionally joining them for dinners. Laura had a presence that was hard to ignore. She was in her early 40s, yet carried herself with the confidence of someone who had lived through storms and come out stronger. Her laughter was magnetic, and she had this way of looking at you, really looking, that made you feel as though you were the only person in the room. It was disarming, and before I knew it, I found myself lingering longer after meals, engaging her in conversations that went well past midnight. At first, it was harmless. She would ask about my career, my hobbies, my frustrations with life. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't done with anyone in years. She listened without judgment, and when she offered advice, it didn't feel like the typical lectures I'd grown used to. She spoke from experience, from mistakes she had made, and it resonated with me. One night, after my mother had gone to bed, Laura and I stayed in the kitchen sipping wine. The house was quiet, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. She told me about her divorce, how she had stayed too long in a loveless marriage, hoping it would change, only to realize she was sacrificing her own happiness. There was a sadness in her eyes as she spoke, but also a strength that I admired. When the conversation turned to me, I admitted more than I should have. I told her about Megan, about how disconnected I felt, about how I wasn't sure if we had a future together. Laura listened, nodding softly, her eyes never leaving mine. Then, after a long pause, she said something that made my heart pound in my chest. "You deserve to feel alive," she said quietly. It was such a simple sentence, but it landed like a thunderclap. For weeks, months even, I had been going through the motions, numbing myself to the dissatisfaction in my relationship. And here was Laura, speaking the words I had been too afraid to admit to myself. From that moment, the air between us shifted. The conversations grew more charged, the silences heavier, the glances lingering longer than they should have. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something was happening, something dangerous and exhilarating, and I felt myself being pulled into it.